Hi, everybody. I've missed you all so much. Um, I don't know if you can tell, but I had to put a chair in front of the door because my dogs can open it, and I wanted to be able to be undisturbed while I read our book to you. After getting several opinions from your classmates and all of my classes combined, really, we decided that we are going to read Terrible Typhoid Mary. I took the paper cover off just so that I didn't damage it. So I'm excited. This is kind of the one that I wanted to read anyway. So yay. What I'm going to try and do is about a chapter per video. That's the goal anyway. Some chapters obviously are going to be shorter than others, so if that's the case, then maybe we'll do 2 chapters. It'll just depend, but I'll let you know in advance how that's going. But for today, for this video, we're going to focus on the introduction and chapter 1. And then if that goes well, I'll go ahead and go into chapter 2 for a separate video, but right now. So this is Terrible Typhoid Mary. It is a true story of the deadliest cook in America. It is by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. If you want to get your hands on a copy or can in any way. If not, you can just listen to my voice. So we have a Dear Reader letter from the author that I'm going to start with, and then we'll go into chapter 1. Okay. Dear reader, if you are squeamish and don't like to read about germs, then you should stop now and find some other book to read. If you don't scrub your hands with soap and hot water for at least 30 seconds after using the toilet or before eating, if you don't clean underneath your fingernails, if you don't sneeze or cough into a tissue, elbow, or your shoulder in order to not spray germs, if you touch doorknobs or share eating utensils or set your sandwich down on the cafeteria table, if you practice the 5-second rule, if you don't change or launder your bath towel at least twice a week, if you don't wipe your cell phone and keyboard with a disinfectant at least once a day, if you don't clean out your backpack or your purse every day, then read on. Sincerely, the author. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to do with germs in this story. Maybe some similarities that we have with today's society. So here is the next page. This is the house that all of this actually took place in. Keep in mind this is based on a true story. And the little caption that goes with that image says, Mr. and Mrs. Charles E. Warren, their 4 children, and 5 servants lived in this graceful-looking Oyster Bay house during the summer of 1906. So now we have our mindset of when, 1906, where, Oyster Bay. That's up in the northeastern part of the United States, over by New York. So yeah, there's that, and then this part down here says, Ms. Warren hired Mary Mallon as her cook. The servants' agency said Mary had impeccable references, and that is a snippet of information from the New York American. That's probably a journal of some kind from 1909 from the New York Public Library. So we will have snippets of information throughout the story that are legitimate facts, but part of it is open to interpretation because we weren't there. We don't know exactly what happened. Okay, chapter 1, in which Miss Warren has a servant problem. In Oyster Bay, Long Island, Mrs. Charles Eliot Warren had fired her cook. It was August 1906, and with several weeks left in the summer, she needed a cook. She could not manage without one, not with a household of 4 children and 5 servants to feed, not with a social calendar filled to the brim with dinner parties and Sunday teas. Also, don't forget that I yawn a lot when I'm reading out loud. It's not intentional, but it does happen sometimes, so I apologize in advance. Okay, here was this coming. Sorry. Making it just like the classroom is my goal. Okay. For a wealthy woman such as Mrs. Warren, it was a terrible fix. There were plenty of servants in America, roughly 2.3 million, but for a woman like her, a good servant was hard to find. Mrs. Warren needed a cook who wouldn't mind the lack of freedom and the 14-hour days. She needed someone available morning, noon, and night. Someone who wore a white servant's cap, apron, a plain dress, and thick-soled shoes. Someone who never left the house without permission. Some cooks shared rooms with other servants. Others made themselves comfortable, sleeping in the attic or the cellar. A good servant wasn't uppity. She knew her place. If a servant was smarter than her employer, she never showed it. She was humble. She ate in the kitchen, using plain crockery and ironware, not the good family china and silver. Even though her employer called her by her given name, Bridget or Sally or Peggy or Maggie, she said Mr. and Sir, and Miss or Mrs. and Ma'am. No matter her age, she was always treated as a girl and never a lady. A servant never used the front entrance of the house. She entered and left through the service entrance at the rear of the property or under the front stoop. If she happened to spy her employer outside the home, she averted her eyes and never acknowledged her. Good servants understood that all Americans were equal, regardless of class, but they also understood that employers were more equal than servants. A good servant didn't complain. She didn't demand a labor contract with clearly defined hours, duties, and wages. For many employers, a good servant meant a specific race, nationality, and religion. Some employers hired white help only, some preferred black help only, some hired Protestants only, or others hired Catholics. Some hired immigrants, and some would not. Duty of hiring servants fell to the lady of the house, so Mrs. Warren did what most other New York City ladies did. She telephoned Mrs. Stricker's servants agency on 28th Street in Manhattan and said, "Send me a cook." The agency director gave Mrs. Warren the name of a good plain cook named Mary Mallon and praised her references, character, and abilities in the kitchen. No doubt Mrs. Warren was impressed. Mary had worked for some of the most prominent and socially elite families in New York City. Families whose names appeared alongside the Warrens in Who's Who and in society pages of the New York Times, and for this she was well paid. As a cook, Mary earned $45 a month, which was roughly $1,180 today. This was much more than Mary would have earned cooking for a middle-class family. This wasn't unusual. The wealthier the family, the more they paid, as much as double the salary for the same worker in a middle-class home. It was a simple fact of life. Was Mary a perfect servant? No servant ever was. If she were, she would have been bolted firmly to someone else's kitchen floor long before she had a chance to work for the Warrens. There is no record of the interview between Mrs. Warren and Mary Mallon. There likely was no interview. If Mrs. Warren didn't like a cook, she'd simply send her back. When the agency sent Mary Mallon, she was 37 years old, unmarried, with no family or children, and in good health, never sick a day. She had good references that praised her. Sure, Mary never stayed longer than a year or two at one house, but that wasn't unusual for a servant. There were gaps in her employment history, but this too wasn't unusual for domestic workers. Mary was Irish and Roman Catholic. Although some employers were prejudiced against Irish Catholics, by 1906 this attitude was changing, especially regarding Irish women. More than 80% of Irish-born women working in America toiled as domestic servants. Employment agencies touted them as excellent workers. Many employers agreed. They paid their Irish servants for quick wit, a strong arm, and voluble tongue. They called their servants industrious, pious, and they noted that Irish servants had sterling integrity and were rarely in trouble with the law. One employer put it simply, the Irish are, as a rule, honest. Did Mrs. Warren hold these stereotypical views? We don't know, but we do know she hired Mary on the spot. Mary's life was about to change forever. Okay, that was the end of chapter 1. So, what do we know now? That this is early 1900s, okay? So, yes, we're talking about servants and employers and that type of stuff, but this is a very, very different time period than what we live in today. We are going to see some disease, maybe something similar to what we're experiencing today. Maybe not. We'll see. But it did not matter necessarily. I'm trying to think of how to say this, or ask it, I guess. What I need for you to do is to think about some of the things that we are facing in today's society, the way things are going in our present situation, and compare it to what might be going on in this time period. See if you can point out any similarities or common entities that are happening between the two. And I will post chapter 2 shortly. See ya!